Our next speaker, our second to last speaker, is going to be Paul Shepard. And Paul came actually all the way from Syracuse, New York. He is our token Bernie Sanders supporter for the panel. And he is also a blogger. The name of his blog is mammon.today, and the slogan is "Left Patriots, Where Are You?" So Paul is going to give us some comments.
Based on these are some very impressive speakers so far, and based on what they've said, I think I'm preaching to the choir when I say that I consider Donald Trump to be a dangerous maniac. And watching his speeches online, one gets the sense that many of his supporters are supremely vile. Particularly when protesters are ejected. I have to take pains to remember that they don't all share his bigotry, and that hate as unbridled and rancorous as his is not enough to bind these masses of working-class white people around him, that they are dispossessed and enslaved by the same globalizing capital that enslaves us all. And as workers, they belong to the left, but are they instead left out? Is there something wrong with them, or is there something wrong with nominally left-wing coalitions of recent history? I'm actually from near Syracuse. I'm from Madison County, where there are more cows than people. My area is overwhelmingly white and rural or suburban. I wrote an opinion piece for my town's newspaper a few months ago explaining to them my reasons for becoming a Democrat. I reminded my neighbors that this city's massive and diverse population ensures that time after time we anoint a Democrat and not a Republican as our presidential contender, and that Hillary Clinton is just so horrible that we have got to get together and ensure that Sanders gets the nomination instead. He is the reason I joined. I was smugly independent before last year. Since joining that party, I'm a little disgusted, but I should not have been surprised the amount of apologism that there is for Hillary Clinton, who's a hypocrite and a criminal. But too many working people in my area can't imagine themselves getting behind Sanders as I've done, much less anything more radical or truly progressive than Sanders. I think some of this resistance is owed to the culture war. I've been a cashier, a produce clerk, a library clerk, and a landscaper. And I can't tell you the number of working people I've met who, because of abortion or marriage equality or something like that, anything but our common class struggle, would never vote for a Democrat. I've always been pro-choice, and I've always believed in marriage equality. But in my view, these questions are absolutely peripheral. The siren song of electoralism is that you can come to identify with the richest people, the Wall Street oozers and exploiters, over these culture war questions, which are at best of secondary importance. If in this identification, their victories appear to be your victories. But if you've been a cashier, as I have, handling money and merchandise for hours, bored out of your mind, then you've noticed that there are cashiers, queer and straight, there are cashiers of every race, and there are female as well as male cashiers. But we're all doing the same mind-numbing thing for which we are so sorely undercompensated, while Wall Street holds the lash and engorges itself in our sweat. The rich don't get rich through hard work or gumption. They get rich on the backs of poor and working people. So it doesn't really matter so much the ratio of overpaid male CEOs to overpaid female CEOs. What matters is that parasites are parasites no matter their gender. Caitlyn Jenner caused an enormous stir. She brought a lot of haters and well-wishers out of the woodwork. But think about the plight of trans women in men's prison. While they're part of the conversation in ways most bookish and meaningless, they do not partake of Ms. Jenner's caviar, or her money, or her fabulous wardrobe, or her ungodly privilege. Would these women not be far better served by general prison reform to address their torment, not to mention overcrowded prisons, draconian and excessive sentencing, punitive drug laws, and the national shame and human rights crisis of solitary confinement? Now, they say Trump has freedom of action. They say that Wall Street doesn't have strings on him. But this billionaire does not want to raise the minimum wage, and he wants to further swell our bloated military and further empower murderous policemen over the people. So for these reasons, he's obviously our class enemy. But Mrs. Clinton is just as much our enemy, a multimillionaire who takes money from the private prison lobby and who from 1986 to 1992 served on Walmart's board of directors, even in the midst of their merciless and thuggish resistance to the unions trying to get a better life for workers there. So she's a class warrior of the worst kind because she's on the wrong team. To the latte liberals who would never shop at Walmart, I want to ask them, would you vote for one of its bosses? Many's the barista serving your latte who wouldn't be caught dead voting for Clinton, and it speaks to her poisonous cunning that she just might be able to lie her way into the White House. Now, the average donation for the Sanders campaign has been $27, and he's accumulated more individual donations to his campaign than any other candidate in history. I myself gave him $12. He doesn't take super PAC money, which means he's not being bribed by the corporate elite as Clinton is. Like Trump, Sanders is not beholden to these elites, but Trump is one of them, and Sanders one of us. America did not have in our era a serious major political party that could speak for working people until Sanders arrived to seize the Democrats as his vehicle. In Bernie Sanders' repeated calls for political revolution, in the enthusiasm and passionate citizenship of those standing behind him, I don't think it's impossible that we might transform the Democratic Party into a workers' party. It's gone through many transformations in the past, being as it is the oldest continuously functioning party on earth, which I think is very fitting, considering, as Sanders said in his speech to Liberty University, his politics are in line with the wisdom of all the religion on earth. And he very eloquently summarized his position in the same speech as follows. Money and wealth should serve the people should not have to serve money and wealth. Now, people hold abortion and marriage equality and so on very dear, and on these questions I'm in agreement with Sanders clearly, but I also find myself in agreement with Mrs. Clinton, at least until she evolves again. I don't think the Democratic Party should abandon its commitment to those things. But the present era shows that when you foreground those questions, it becomes like a thin veneer to hide but in no way repairing the irreconcilable split between, in this case, Democrats, rich and poor, the exploiters and the exploited. As long as culture war questions remain in the foreground, not only will the likes of Clinton and Schumer and Cuomo continue to wreak their mischief and remain Democrats, albeit in name only, but a true mass movement of American workers united as workers and not as social liberals or social conservatives will remain impossible. And for people caught up on questions of social conservatism versus social liberalism, I think it's best to remember that the rich actually don't care and needn't care about these questions. Consider Roe versus Wade. If Roe versus Wade were overturned, it would be like before. For the poor, purposeful miscarriages and unwanted children and dead women. But the rich could just jet off to some other country or bribe a sympathetic concierge doctor to perform the procedure. So in practical terms, the right of the rich to secure an abortion cannot be taken away, and that won't change no matter who we vote for in 2016. Or consider the war on drugs and on prostitution. Think about the enormous amount of effort and energy spent perpetuating those policies and the miseries arising from them. But the richest of rich men can spend the weekend inhaling the purest cocaine from the bodies of the priciest escorts, and no war on drugs or war on vice is going to stop him. So he didn't really care about that either. And when you are so rich that you don't have to follow the rules, that's what makes Citizens United and the super PACs and Goldman Sachs and the Koch brothers and all the rest so hideously offensive. Is that for them to advocate for the rights of women or for the fetus, or to pour heaps of money toward promoting or combating the war on drugs, it's all completely disingenuous and hypocritical when the rules aren't going to affect them anyway. And that attitude is perhaps unsurprising considering the connections between psychopathy and high finance. Researchers at the University of Surrey concluded that compared to criminal psychiatric patients, business managers were more likely to be obsessive-compulsive, narcissistic, or histrionic. A 2010 study of management executives from 7 companies found that 4% of the sample could be defined confidently as psychopathic, but some estimates put it as high as 10%, far, far outpacing its occurrence among everyday American working people. Now, James Silver, in a 2012 Atlantic article, defines psychopathy as follows, and does this not describe Wall Street to a T. Psychopathy is a psychological condition based on well-established diagnostic criteria, including superficial charm, conning and manipulative behavior, a lack of empathy and remorse, and a willingness to take risks. So we're really surprised when Martin Shkreli drops out of school at the age of 17 to intern on Wall Street and becomes a hedge fund manager. He buys the rights to Daraprim and jacks the price up from $13.50 per pill to $750 per pill. His name for a generation will be synonymous with the most inhuman greed imaginable, and that's the moral education you get on Wall Street. He was arrested late last year for securities fraud, reminding us in turn of Madoff, who defrauded with his schemes some fabulously wealthy people and so was locked up. It seems ripping off members of your own Wall Street gang will get you in serious trouble, but price gouging terminally ill people for medicine, that'll make people mad at you on the internet, but not much, not much more. It is pleasing to think, though, that Shkreli's reputation is ruined, and that in a calculated pose of contrition, he offered a large sum of money to the Sanders campaign, which was refused, tainted as it was by the greed of Big Pharma, which Sanders is so vocal in condemning. Now, I do not agree with every position he holds or every vote that Sanders has ever cast, but I don't need a checklist if I know he wants to more than double the federal minimum wage, close private prisons, promote community policing, institute universal health care and free higher education, demilitarize the police, close private prisons, and most appealing of all, his promise to break up the super banks that caused the financial collapse and which have never had a tighter grip over our country or over world affairs, including Citigroup, which is Hillary Clinton's #1 donor and puppeteer. When I think of the many working people I've known, and alongside whom I've worked throughout my life, toiling so long for so much less than we deserve, laughed at by jet-set leeches who think they can have it all, I can only say that to me, voting for a man who will break up the banking cartels and double our wages is a righteous act. I refuse, however, to be cowed into thinking that what I do the other 364.99 days of the year is somehow less important, and for that reason I'm so excited about all I'm learning here and all I hope to accomplish to improve the life of the American worker and his or her suffering family, and to throw off the tyranny of Wall Street and its insane financial oligarchy, the source of all conflict and injustice in America and around the world.
All right. Well, before we get to our last speaker, I actually, your remarks, Paul, reminded me of something. I want to apologize for the fact that we have an all-male panel. Because if we're going to have a people's front that fights for justice, one of the things it's absolutely going to have to include is the fight for women's equality and women's rights. So I really do want to apologize for that. So on that note, we'll have George. So George is from the Party of Communists, by the way. Longtime organizer.
Not only am I the last speaker, but I'll probably also be the briefest speaker, mainly because I hate standing up in front of a crowd, especially with filming and everything else. First, just the Party of Communists is a relatively new party. It was formed about 2 years ago. The majority of members split from the old Communist Party USA because they figured it was no longer, and some of us think for quite some time, no longer a revolutionary party. We have some of our literature, some international literature over there, so feel free to browse. Some of it costs money. I just want to talk very briefly with somewhat of a historical perspective on the fight against war and fascism. And I'm also one of the older people in the room, and my political career basically began in the fight against the war in Vietnam. And there's one important distinction between the political economic situation at that time and now, right? And that is, at the same time that, for example, Johnson was sending hundreds of thousands of troops to Vietnam, he was declaring the so-called Great Society at home, right? Now it's a very different situation. Not only is there war and threats of war all over the world, everywhere from Venezuela to Ukraine to the Middle East, all over Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, and threats even against North Korea. But there's attacks against working people and oppressed peoples in the United States at a alarming rate. There's attacks against trade union rights, there's attacks against workers' living standards and living conditions. There's particularly attacks against oppressed peoples, black and Latino, particularly with the shooting of so many unarmed, mostly young people. Right? And this gives us a very different situation than what we had back in the 60s in terms of a united front, because basically we can look at it in terms of a united front against the war at home as well as a war abroad. We had earlier in the present anti-war movement, basically starting with the invasion of Afghanistan and then Iraq, a group that had a very important role for a short time called NYCLAW, New York City Labor Against the War. I don't know if too many people are familiar with it, but it came out of the whole new upsurge after the invasion of Afghanistan. It was an attempt to bring in mostly organized trade union workers into the anti-war movement. What was interesting was there were 4 co-coordinators. They did a very good work at bringing this out up to a certain point, but all 4 of them were one way or another removed from their office, partly with the excuse that, oh, you're spending all your time on these international questions and not dealing with the bread and butter questions. One of the things we have to do in terms of anti-war movement in the United Front is to make the links clear between the wars abroad and the wars at home, okay? And what basically unites us is that we all have a common enemy, which whether we think of it in these terms or not, but that's U.S. imperialism, okay? U.S. imperialism is the one that's going after resources all over the world, particularly oil, but all sorts of, you know, gold and uranium and whatever else it is. And, you know, looking for geostrategic areas to control, in the course of which it's also fighting against its rivals, which, you know, we have to concentrate on our own ruling class, so I'm not going to worry too much about the situation of the rivals, right? But it's that same ruling class that is trying to cut back wages, that is trying to oppress particularly black and Latino people, cut out trade union rights and so forth, all right? So, again, we're in a different situation from the 1960s. I want to say a little bit about the whole question of the United Front. One of the things is that the United Front against war and fascism is going to contain various different forces, and particularly both revolutionary forces and reformist forces. And sometimes that's going to bring a lot of contradictions, okay? The reformist forces, the leadership of those forces, very much tend to want to isolate their so-called base from the revolutionary forces because they don't want them to be kind of contaminated with revolutionary anti-imperialist ideas. Okay? That can be fought and has been fought by enough mass pressure on the leadership of the reformist forces that they have to, at least to a certain extent, allow unity with the revolutionaries. We had this in some of the earlier big anti-war demonstrations in Washington, where we had groups like United for Peace and Justice, which was at certain times forced to have joint rallies, joint speakers with some of the revolutionary anti-imperialist groups.
And
Okay.
Syriza.
Huh?
That was Syriza also.
With Syriza also, okay. Then we have a secondary problem in a certain sense within the United Front, which is the question of divisions between different revolutionary political groups. Okay, there have been times when this came down to some things that were extremely petty. All right, I would say it's based on what we called small circle spirit. Right? Groups that saw their own groups, what they were doing is more important than what the movement as a whole is doing. Okay? So without going into any specifics of the names of any groups, right? But I still remember back in, I don't remember what year it was, about 10 years ago, when 2 different of the revolutionary groups called demonstrations against the war in Washington about 2 weeks apart. And, you know, people who are kind of on the inside and who know, oh, this is this group and that is that group, knew what was going on. Ordinary people who saw like a poster on a lamppost would have seen, oh, okay, demonstrate in Washington February 16th. Another one demonstrate in Washington February 28th or something like that. And somebody would have thought, did they change the date? Did they move it around or whatever? Anyway, in terms of that, I think the only thing that can be done is simply to make every attempt that in any coalition, in any united front, that all the groups have the right to put forward their own viewpoint, but within the overall context of the united front, and that as long as the groups have confidence in their own line, it shouldn't matter. Okay. Just going to conclude with one last thing. Maybe it will be part of the discussion, which is in reference to what Caleb said about the need for a single group that supports the struggle for peace, jobs, democracy, and equality. I think those areas are fine, okay? I think at this point, what is needed is to try and unite the struggles as much as possible. It will take quite some time to make it into a single group, all right? But people, particularly who are anti-imperialists, who go, 2 days ago there was this big demonstration for the hot and crusty workers, against union busting, right? Anti-imperialists have to be there and explain this struggle is the same as the struggle against the war in the Middle East and so forth. All right? Over a period of time, we can try and build towards unity of the various struggles. Mm-hmm. That's it.
I apologize for the length of the meeting as well, but the reason it was so long is because when I started this out, I just kept getting emails of people who wanted to be involved and people who wanted to participate, and I couldn't help but say yes. If we're going to talk about unity, you can't say no. So, that's kind of how these things work. So I guess we should have a discussion at this point. So people from the audience who want to say something, let's hear it. So let's start with Priya, I guess. Why don't I said I was going to start with you first, so why don't I start with you, Ben, and then Priya. So.
I insist.
Okay.
Well, let me touch on a few things real quick, though. Would you go up to the mic? Huh? Can you go up to the mic?
Oh, sure, yeah, please. Open mic.
It's all recording.
Yeah.
Let's start over there. Just wait the mic to catch everything, right? Well, I wanted to say, too, about the, like what the brother was saying. I think that fear is our greatest enemy in all of these struggles. And what you said earlier, too, just now, George, that the only way that this could really work is that each organization that is going in this movement, because we're all in the same struggle. The struggle is real. Each one have their own view. Just like all the political parties, they have their own agenda. But we have to, in order to promote unity, we have to be willing to hear their side. If this organization has an agenda to push, they can push it on the same panel that we push ours. We can give room for that. That's how we foster unity. Toleration. We have to be able to tolerate one another. All of us are different in so many ways, but we are all the same in so many ways too. I want to say that earlier when you were speaking about the defenses of the oppression of the black man, I'm a black man, so I identify 100%. And a lot of white people can identify it too because they on either one side or the other. They can fall under or they can fall on top, but they can still see it. It's still clear. It's not hidden in America. The oppression is real. We need to realize that we have lacked one principle that all other nationalities in this country have. We don't have human rights. We're not looked at as a black individual. I'm not looked at as a human being. I'm looked at as a commodity, like cattle, a piece of property. And Martin Luther King marched for 13 years and got civil rights. Okay, I could sue you for doing me dirty, but at the end of the day, you could kill me and there's no repercussions. Why? Because I'm not technically a human being. We need to have that also on the agenda, on all of these agendas. Because if we're not all looked at as human beings, how can we stand unified? How can we have, what was that you said? Equality. We can't have equality if we're not all treated equally. If you're treated like a human being and I'm treated like a piece of property, it's not going to work. And so, in my opinion, I think that should be first on the agenda. To get all people treated as human beings, get us our human rights. Then we could talk about reparations for what you did to us for 550 years of slavery, and it's counting, because it's like he said, we're still slaves. They have developed techniques to continue the slavery mentality through the media, through materialism, through socialism. You know, a lot of people are slave to Facebook. I gotta admit, I'm slave to Facebook too. But it's a voice, it's an avenue to get the message across. Because not only do I be on the junk, I also be on the positive good road too, and putting the message out. So it has a dual purpose. But like you said, the lesser of two evils. Yeah, you go with the evil you know. Really? Why do we have to have the evil? Why don't we just cut that out altogether? We don't have no good candidates in the political arena. None. All of them have the same agenda. And we have this selfish mentality that's always, I need more, I need more, I need more, mine. Instead of thinking of, oh, what can I do for my fellow man? How can I make his life better? How can I make her life better? That's what each and every one of us should be thinking. Because, I mean, when God created us, he created us as equal beings. All of us are destined for greatness. All of us are great in and of ourselves. We should be thinking about what we can do to make our fellow man and woman lives easier, better, more functional, more productive. Make their life happy. And if they're thinking the same thing, then how can I not be happy? They're working effortlessly to make me happy. Why can't I do the same? That should be our major goal. That's what should be in the front of on any of the organizations, what they call it, their mission statement. That should be part of our mission statement, to foster the mentality that we should work for each other. Not so much the almighty dollar, that's straight capitalism. Yeah, of course, we need money to survive, things cost, but at the end of the day, if you don't have the money and I still have the ability to do the work, I'm going to do the work because I want you to have what you need, regardless if you could pay me or not. If you could, you would. It's just that simple. But I shouldn't have the mentality that I won't do it if you can't pay. We shouldn't have that. That fosters the toleration of, if you have something to say, it's important to me to hear it. Just like if I have something to say, it's important for you to hear it. We have to listen to one another. We have to give each other time to be able to voice our concerns so that we can know what each and every person's needs are. If I don't know what you need, then how can I help you? If I don't listen to what you tell me, how can I help you? In turn, if I can't help you, why would you want to help me? Right or wrong? Makes sense? And that whole Donald Trump thing, man, listen, he's a straight clown. I can't even see him getting voted in. I can't even see it. If it happened, this country will go down so fast. It'd be unbelievable. Right now, there's a genocide being committed across this country against black people. And other people of color, of other nationalities, they still of color. It's systematic, it's systemic, it's epidemic. I can give you all of those big words to tell you that it's just wrong. They're just doing it, and there's nobody stopping them. But it's blatant. We can all see it. It's not like it's hidden. They're doing it, and they're telling us they're doing it. We got to tell them no. No, you can't. No, you shouldn't. No, you aren't. Period. Nothing is going to happen in a struggle without force. If you ask, they're going to say no. What are you going to do then? Okay. There's going to be some sweat, blood, and tears that drop, because there was sweat, blood, and tears to bring this nation to its fruition. And that was mostly on the backs of slaves, yes. Through blood, sweat, and tears, they built this country, but still treated like second-class citizens. Citizens nonetheless, but second class, not even a human being. We got to change that factor before we can change any of those other things. And the main weapon they're using against us to stop us from being able to unite is fear. They make me afraid of you and you afraid of me. her afraid of any male. You see these slashings they got on the news? I literally believe, and I could be wrong, but I literally believe somebody's paying these people to go out there randomly slashing people to create a fear factor so that we be weary of each other. We cannot unify if we're afraid of one another. If I'm afraid that if I walk past you, you're going to pull out a knife and cut me, I'm not going to be able to have a conversation with you. I'm not going to be able to see what your needs are, and you're not going to be able to see what my needs are, because we're afraid of one another. Fear is a major tool. They use the propaganda machine when they want to go to war. That propaganda machine, the first tool of weaponry is fear. They make the people afraid that this is the reason why you need me to come over here and do what I'm getting ready to do, because I'm trying to keep that fear from you. I'm trying to protect you. When all I'm just trying to rob you. That's what America does. That's our government. That's what we call the great American government does. It's fear. If we can conquer our fear of one another, we can unify. If we can unify, then we can stand up to our government and tell them, listen, you can't do that no more. That clear.
I just want to say, just right quick, that, hold on, Khalid, could you hold it 1 second? I've got to say this right quick.
Okay.
Anyone who critiques Israel and the Zionist government is not anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitic. I just wanted to say that and read this book. So that's important. I know we didn't really touch about internal, on the left, we seem to eat ourselves critique, and then it becomes personal. People become these monsters that they're not because they have a principled critique. And I think when we talk about unity, we're also talking about principled unity. And when we talk about human rights, we're talking about the right that housing is and not a privilege. There's a right to have health care. These are human rights that we're talking about. When we're talking about fascism, when they put us in these little gates, you guys, kettles or whatever, that's a form of fascism. That's the fact of us not being able to have our freedom of assembly. And we really need to look at that and how they put kettles on private public property at like Fox News, which they get tax breaks for. Why do we even go into those little cages? We need to fight that because that's a form of fascism. So I just wanted to say those things are just very, very important. So when we talk about human rights, you don't have human rights if you can't drink the water in Flint. You know what I'm saying? If you have to be back at a curfew at 10 o'clock, if you're a grown man and you're not on drugs and you're not mentally ill, like these are things that we don't have right here. Now, we don't even talk about Syria and what's happening in Palestine and all the rest of it. Things are happening right at this city. So I definitely agree with all the four points that you talked about. But I think it's really important that we also bring it home as well, because we got the fascism, we got the capitalism, we got the imperialism, we got the attacks against women. I live right down the street. I live right down the street from what was the Yippie and the Planned Parenthood abortion center. And every time I walk past somebody that says, don't kill babies, you need to tell Wall Street, stop sending drones over to kill babies everywhere else and the police to kill us in our own communities. So bringing the war home, we have to talk about it. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
If you want people in general to take you seriously, like people who are, they're working and they have children and they have bills and all this stuff, you have to have a program. And if you look at many of the great social movements in the past, the reason why they were able to force Roosevelt into, creating 11 million jobs or whatever it was, stopping the child labor, creating Social Security, having a safety net for people, all this stuff. The majority of the stuff the unions wanted and things that people take for granted, taking the days off, vacations, 40-hour work weeks. None of these things really existed, and if they existed, free college used to be free. A lot of these, fascistoid austerity ghouls that you see, like Bill O'Reilly and a lot of these people. A lot of these people, if you look into their backgrounds, they had the benefit in the 60s and 70s of going to free college, whether it was SUNY or CUNY or some other little college someplace. Many of them went to free college. But the point of I'm saying all that to say is that, people need a program in order to be taken seriously, because the analysis paralysis, it'll start to eat at your mind emotionally, mentally, and then you just wind up one of those people foaming at the mouth and running out there in the rain and doing all this other stuff and really not getting anywhere. Any serious program You know, you need to have a platform where people can organize around, and then you have to have demands, right? And mass traction demands. That's what, you know, attracted me the most and why I'm still involved to the capacity that I'm in with the United Front Against Austerity and Tax Wall Street Party, because, you know, I'm not in a situation to waste time or energy. You know, I'm not in a situation to just do stuff just to do it. I want to see results. And the only way you get results is you need to have a program of some kind, of some sort, and a serious program. Otherwise, you're just spinning your own wheels.
Exactly. That's
And
one
that's
of the
it.
reasons why this movement was created, is because a lot of these left groups are out there, and a lot of them don't have programs or even a constitution. There needs to be an actual organization where there's maybe a constitution, a way how to do things, and as you said, it's definitely going to be democratic. If this movement progresses over time and gets more and more people, it's going to be more organized, and we're going to have to go in some kind of direction. And that may entail even creating, like, if we get enough support, financially, what have you, and people, we even open up maybe, like, it's like called dual power. Like if you have a government city hall, you create a people's city hall, or even something like a people's library, and you keep going from there. You compete with the government that we all, I think, can agree we do not approve of, and we make a people's government alongside of the government. It's like competing powers. The capitalists, they want competition, we'll give them competition. But yeah, so who else? Anyone else want to go? Anyone? You. Here you go.
Oh, how do I do the camera work? Let's see. A selfie. I guess can't even see. I have up on the internet peacefulrevolution.us. I also have, if you Google around my name, Joe Friendly's plan for peaceful but total revolution. That's somewhere else. But I've been preoccupied 40 years trying to come up with the words you're talking about to articulate the alternative. And one of the things I would offer as a nuance that I haven't heard before is our beginning to create a government in waiting so that we can calmly talk about huge changes with the idea of ultimately winning a consensus to peacefully accomplish the transfer of wealth from the 1% to the public and the whole deal. I try to come up with language along those lines. So I'm throwing my hat in the ring. Take a look at my language, see if you can improve on it. Thanks.
Thanks, Joe. First thing I want to throw out is that we only have the room until 10. So we should probably begin to start wrapping up. You know, we can have a few more comments. And then the other thing I wanted to say is I think we should talk about moving forward. And I think we need to have a meeting, like a sit-down meeting, some of us, you know, all of us who are welcome, and we need to, everyone who signed the email list, and we need to get together and write some kind of very broad statement of principles of some kind. And then at that point, I think that we should call another meeting that's much bigger. And I think everyone here should try to bring at least 20 people to that meeting, and we can actually get this going. And also, I guess I just want to say the Tax Wall Street Party brought these two proposals. I mean, does someone from the Tax Wall Street Party want to just touch on that, and maybe we can vote yay or nay, or?
Yeah, I mean, I can reiterate it.
Okay, well, I mean, we heard you say it, but do we want to vote yay or nay? I mean, do people approve it? One, wanting the closing of the ISIS corridor in Turkey, and the second being opposition to Donald Trump. Do we want to vote for that? Are people up for having a vote?
Sure.
All right.
Those are all good points.
All right.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Yay.
All opposed? All right. The motion carries. Thank you, Tax Wall Street Party. All right. So, comments, please.
I just have a quick question. I like to know what else is saying. I'm not really sure. I never heard this pointed out. Maybe it has been, but I didn't hear the plane that was shot, the Russian plane that was shot down by Turkey by going into its little peninsula of airspace. Was it around this corridor? Were they headed to do something over there? You know?
Yeah, it was in that area, yeah.
Because that's the way that plane would have gone.
If it even did cross into airspace, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I know.
Okay. The purpose of this meeting is to form a united front against imperialism and against fascism. Now, to form a united front, I think. Careful. The purpose of a united front is to basically bring together groups that have different social and political philosophies around a single issue. Now, I don't know if a war created in the Middle East by the United States by a military force that the U.S. is responsible for is an issue that I think we should organize around because ISIS is a U.S. front. ISIS is like, what was it, Al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda? It's a U.S. front. I mean, what goal are we going to achieve by bringing an issue that is basically created by the fascist state to the UN, where they are waging a war to divide the Middle East in order to conquer and seize their land? I don't see that as a point. And I think that what we have to look at is the internal contradictions, the primary contradictions that are faced in this country. The primary contradictions that are faced in this country is national oppression. Whether you deal with internal or external, when you look at ISIS and you look at the divisions created in places like Afghanistan and Syria, I mean, they just created these wars. The overthrow of Libya, the use of a puppet like Obama to actually overthrow the Libyan government and exploit the Jamahariya. I mean, these are things that the imperialist has done. And so I don't think we should look at like, well, the forces that were created by the United States, but that we should condemn the United States itself for creating these forces and expose them and show that they're actually responsible for the imperialist intrigue that we're seeing in Syria and Libya and the Middle East. So I don't know if that would be a good point of organizing. I think the point of organizing would have to be a united front around national liberation, the unification of American nationality around issues, because the chief source of oppression is coming from the American ruling class. The American working class must contend with the American ruling class. They must be critical and they must form alliance with the oppressed nationalities and oppressed people. And so primacy should be placed on the oppressed classes and nationalities that are exploited and oppressed by the American ruling class, and this is where we must forge unity around. And this will be the liberating force for the American working class also, because it will internalize contradictions. And this is what we need to do.
I actually want to make a comment, and I'm mainly going to touch on what Chris raised, but I'm also going to touch on what you said as well. Oh, are we still? Okay, why don't you go first, yeah.
My question is actually addressing, I don't want to be on camera actually.
Okay.
So I'm from Germany, from Berlin. I'm an activist for 20 years, and I've been fascism and so on, anti-capitalist for that amount of time, and I'm also political. So I'm just a little bit curious about the ruling class in the United States. I mean, you addressed the ruling class as basically Rockefeller and corporate, right?
It's two factions.
Two factions. What is about the third faction, which is actually developing? Because you were addressing the computer revolution or the technology revolution we're right now in. And this form of revolution is basically controlled pretty much by a new ruling class, isn't it? Or a new part of the ruling class. Could you just comment about the relationship about those? I mean, there's three players, I would say, in that fragmented ruling class. Can you just have a comment on that? Because I think that makes a tremendous, significant impact on the way we need to relate I mean, that's what's addressed here. We have revolutionary aspects, but we also need to include specific reformist aspects. And reformist aspects usually can only be resolved into a positive outcome if there is a status cooperativo element, so which means we need to address the demand to the ruling class, which they basically can fulfill in order that this reform can happen. I would believe that this new fraction actually is the main part of this ruling class where the reformist kind of demands we have should be addressed. But I just wanted to, because I'm a little bit surprised that in the United States, I don't know if it's just by accident you're a great thinker, I know, and a good writer and so on, but I'm just wondering why you didn't address this third element of this fragmented ruling class.
Well, tell you what, I'm going to respond first about Syria, about some of the back and forth we've had about Syria, and then I'll address that issue economically. And then I think we're running out of time. So is that okay if I make some concluding remarks and then we conclude? Because I think pretty soon I'm going to get fined for using the room too long. But about Syria, you know, it's infuriating when you watch the news because they'll make statements like Bashar Assad is a brutal dictator and already 250,000 people are dead. Well, 250,000 people in Syria, at least, have died already, but they have not all died as a direct result of the policies of the Syrian government. They've died as a direct result of the war imposed on that country by the United States. Saudi Arabia, Jordan, which, I mean, is certainly, I mean, they have CIA training camps in Jordan for the anti-government fighters. There are training camps for Turkey. Sorry about that. I'm playing it with. Okay. Sorry about that. If you want to mic me up, you can. All right, thanks. They have training camps in Jordan and in Turkey. There are training camps for ISIS. They've gotten ISIS fighters to admit on video that they work out of training camps in Turkey. And essentially, Syria has been, you know, just destroyed. And this war, I have to point this out over and over and over again. This war would have been over in 1 week if it were not for the intervention of Western powers. This war is completely manufactured. Most of the fighters are not even Syrians. So many of the fighters are low-income people from countries like Jordan, from Qatar, just people who don't have jobs, and they hand them guns and they send them to Syria as mercenaries to try and overthrow the Syrian government. And why are they targeting the Syrian government? The Syrian government is a nationalist government. If you look at the Ba'ath Socialist Party, you know, this is a party that fights for the liberation of the Syrian nation, of the Arab peoples. And they are a party and a country that has declared independence from the international financial system. And if you look at the way a lot of their economy is organized, it's a centrally planned economy. They don't have free market capitalism. The Syrian government, led by the Ba'ath Socialist Party, dictates the policies and doesn't completely obey Wall Street. Now, I'm not going to say there aren't problems there. There's obviously, and the Syrians are the first ones to tell you there's problems of corruption and that there's problems with how their country is set up, and they need reform. They desperately need reform. But the reason the Syrian government is being targeted is because it's an independent and nationalist-oriented state. And that's why people are starving, by the way. When you hear about this starvation, this is a direct result of U.S. policy. And ISIS is part of the U.S.-backed government, anti-government fighting force in Syria. While CNN was talking about the glorious Syrian revolution and, you know, the people are fighting against the dictator Assad, what was happening was the forces that are now ISIS were consolidating and getting U.S.-made weapons and U.S.-made Toyota trucks that they could drive through and just destroy the country. And I feel like opposing ISIS now, the most vulgar thing now is they want to use ISIS. You know, you turn on the TV, they're whipping up all this Islamophobia and this hate on the basis of a group that they themselves created. And the Israelis are giving medical care to in the Golan Heights. And Turkey is allowing them to sell oil on the international markets. They're getting us all to be terrified of Muslims, to think Muslims are our enemies and that we should hate Islam because of a group that they themselves created, which I would say, I'm not a Muslim, I'm not qualified to say it, but I don't think they're Islamic or anything like that. And I feel like exposing that and not allowing them to play into the fear, it's like they have the best of both worlds. They create a terrorist group and then they make us scared of terrorism and they take away our rights. It's a sick game. And so I guess that brings me to the point you raised. I don't know exactly what you were pointing out about a third faction in the ruling class, but I'd really like to talk to you afterwards because I want to learn.
Talking about technocrats.
Well, you could divide the ruling class into many factions. When I said the Koch brothers and the Rockefellers, there's a million factions, and you know the Rockefeller oil is very important, and Koch represents one faction in the oil cartels, and Rockefellers represent another faction. Koch is aligned with Republicans. Rockefellers are with the Democrats, but it divides a million ways into a million places. And one thing that I think really needs to be pointed out is I don't think that the idea that we have, quote, U.S. imperialism, British imperialism, French imperialism, and German imperialism is really modern. I think that we're at the point where there's almost an international imperialism. When Dakim spoke, he talked about the labor aristocracy. A lot of older folks can talk about the 50s, and they say, oh, wasn't it the good old days when, you know, the U.S. was on top of the world? And part of imperialism is the building up of what they call like a labor aristocracy, the loyal, you know, people who make so much money that they may be workers, but they still think like capitalists, and they sympathize with their bosses. And that's an attribute of imperialism when it has a homeland and when it has a domestic loyalty. But if you look at the international banking elite, the people in oil, they're not really loyal to the United States. They're not trying to build up a labor aristocracy here and line the U.S. And make people here richer so they can beat down the rest of the world. They're destroying the labor aristocracy. They're systemically dropping the wages. The labor aristocracy, they talk about the construction workers and the auto workers and all them. And all these people, they're not seeing their wages rise as the bourgeoisie is getting stronger. In fact, they're seeing their wages go down. It's almost like what they did to the third world in order to enrich the first world, they've now turned around and they're starting to do to the first world. And they're creating one global financial system, one global financial dictatorship to drop the wages of everyone and just turn the entire planet into a low-wage prison in some places and a chaotic civil war never ending in other parts of the world. That's the goal. And I feel like that's why I strongly support all the countries that have broken out of that system. No matter what their perspective, no matter what their ideology, any part of the world that has declared independence from that global setup, from that international financial dictatorship, I think has to be supported. And that there needs to be a section of the beautiful uprising going around Black Lives Matter now and around the economic justice issues and the Bernie Sanders. There needs to be a section that realizes that Russia is not our enemy, China is not our enemy, Iran is not our enemy. None of these countries are our enemies. Our enemies are on Wall Street, they're in the London Stock Exchange, they're in Tel Aviv, they're in Frankfurt, Germany, they're all the international headquarters of banking and finance where these global elites are just destroying the planet and gearing up for World War III. That's who we should be fighting against. And that's kind of my message, and that's my thought, and that's my hope. And something desperately needs to be done, and we're not all going to agree with each other at the end of the night, but I want this meeting to turn into an organization. I want this to turn into an organization and something that can come out of this. Everyone who signed that contact sheet is going to get an email. We're going to have another meeting. And we're going to talk about doing some real action, whether demonstrations, protests at the UN, community organizing. Something needs to be done to stop the drive toward fascism and war.